Hi everyone, I'm George Fontan, I'm an architect, and today I want to talk about filing a letter of no objection with the New York City Department of Buildings, okay? This is going to be very specific, just about this one process in New York, all right? So let's start with what is a letter of no objection, all right? It's commonly referred to as an LNO. It also can be an LOV, letter of verification. This is a letter used to determine what is a legal existing use for a property or a legal proposed use for a property, all right? This is a really common thing that we file in New York City. Changes of uses in New York are really important because there's, if you're gonna do an alteration to a building, there's different ways that you can file. We have another video on alteration type 1 versus alteration type 2, and when you need a new certificate of occupancy and when you don't. All right, so this is all really important to figure out if you're gonna do an alteration of a building. Also, sometimes you need to figure out what is the existing legal use of a building, and that's not so easy. So you might file one of these to verify. And as well, you know, there's different miscellaneous times where you might need it. We'll go through some of these. So let's just start with why are we filing? Okay, figuring out if you need to file an Alt 1 or an Alt 2. You know, like I said, we have another video. This will be about the certificate of occupancy. Do you need to get a certificate of occupancy, a new updated certificate of occupancy? The LNO will help you figure that out. All right, verifying an existing use. You know, if you have a certificate of occupancy, sometimes you don't know if the certificate of occupancy qualifies for a certain type of use, all right, and that's where a letter of verification comes in. That's when you have a certificate of occupancy, but you know, you're not really sure if the proposed use qualifies, okay, and so the letter of verification can help you figure that out. You know, it's filed with DOB, they'll review it, and you'll get a response on that issue, all right. You know, very common other reason is you don't have a certificate of occupancy. Okay, and you need to figure it out. So, you know, you're gonna need help with this because you actually have to propose a use to the Department of Buildings. It's not like you just file and say, hey, what's the use of the building? No, you need to propose a use and they'll determine whether or not they're gonna have an objection or if they're able to verify the use, okay? So some of the most common times are, you know, if you wanna get a liquor license, they usually require a letter of verification or a letter of no objection. If you're buying or selling a property, usually this is when people get letters of no objection, letter of verification. Make sure that if you want to move in with a very specific use that you need to use it for, will this apply? You know, for example, if you want to open a restaurant in a retail space, which we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so. You know, or if you're a new tenant and you're going to rent a space. These are some of the times when people typically get a letter of no objection. So, you know, you know, examples I just mentioned. You get a retail space, you want to put a restaurant, you want to verify if that works. You know, in general, in a lot of cases, that is going to be okay. It depends on the number of seating. You know, it depends on a lot of issues. If you're going from use group 6 to use group 6, you know, then it's okay. For example, you know, how many people you're going to have there and what the original use matters. You know, if you have a multifamily building and you want to verify the number of families in the building, okay, this is really important. So if it's unclear, you know, letter of no objection can be used for that purpose. You know, if you're trying to figure out if you have a 2-family house or a 3-family building. Okay, let's go to what you actually have to do. So the letter of no objection is a form that's filed. Okay, but there's a lot of things that go with it. All right, I usually describe the process like a court case. Not that I know much about court, but we all know that a lawyer goes into court, he presents evidence, okay, and the more evidence he has, the better. Well, an LNO goes about the same way. You want to have a lot of supporting documentation, you want to have a lot of information, you want to prove your case. You're basically pitching to them, this is the use that I want, and this is all the documentation that I can provide to show that this use makes sense, okay? So, you know, you're going to fill out the form. You've got the property information, the existing use, and the proposed use. These are the 3 key points, okay? What's the property? What was there? What do you want to use it as, okay? Now, the supporting documentation is really the majority of the work. Everything else is super easy. It's just filling out a form and dropping it off, okay? What goes into the supporting documentation? Records. Records research is basically 90% of a letter of no objection, essentially, okay? Figuring out what is available, what documents are available, what can you get your hands on. There's different agencies between the DOB and you know, other city agencies, other historic records that you can go through. All sorts of records can be used. There's a hierarchy, you know, the DOB will always kind of take their records as the highest authority, like a certificate of occupancy will overrule Department of Finance records, for example. But, you know, the records research is really the majority of this. When clients hire us to do a letter of no objection, that's the first thing we do, is the records research, and we try to figure everything out. My first step is look at what's available and try to determine myself what is actually the legal existing use, and then see if the proposed use will coincide. You're going to want to get photos, especially if you have historic photos. That's helpful. You know, as an architect, I always write a letter with the letter of no objection application, just, you know, a kind of a letter explaining all the evidence. What are we presenting them? What are all the records that we have? All the documentation we're enclosing in the package. I'll go over, you know, building occupancy classifications, you know, the zoning use groups, any zoning information that might be helpful here, and you know, any proposed occupancies, calculations, and such that might be critical to determine whether or not the use will be acceptable. This is probably the only other thing really, aside from records research, that actually requires any work. The rest of it is really simple. But the records research and putting that letter together is really the work of doing a of L&O request. You know, then finally, of course, you have to fill out the DOB paperwork and follow the protocols. So, you know, why would a letter of no objection get an objection? Why might it get rejected? A few simple reasons. One is you're proposing a use that's inconsistent with the existing use. The Department of Buildings is going to kind of give you a ruling. Does how you want to use this coincide with the way it's meant to be used, okay? That's the most common reason they're gonna reject it, is because they're gonna say, no, there's some kind of change, and because of that change, we want you to file an alteration type 1 you know, application and get a certificate of occupancy. This is a whole big process. We have another video on Alt 1s versus Alt 2s. You can check that out, okay? Another reason, a very simple reason it could get objection is that you have violations on the property. They might give you, you know, an objection saying, you know, clear these violations, and that's pretty basic. Always check if you've got violations on the buildings. If you have violations, clear them, fix them, you know, correct everything, and pay your fees. Okay, and then, you know, another critical reason they might reject it is insufficient evidence, that you're posing it to them. It's not their job to do the homework for you. It is their job to review your homework, to check your homework. You are giving them the information, not here's a form, go dig around. It's not their job to dig around. It's your job to dig around. That's why you hire, you know, somebody like we do this for clients sometimes. You know, it's you know, it depends, because, you know, if it's not a real clear-cut case, you got to be careful about getting into these types of things. But, you know, if you're willing to spend the time and energy to go down this route to verify your property, it certainly relieves a lot of questions. Okay, so that's basically the point of filing a letter of no objection, is that you want to tell the Department of Buildings how the building was being used, how you think it was being used, and how you are proposing to use the building or the space within the building, and they're going to either give you an objection to the use, or they're going to give you a letter of no objection or a letter of verification saying, yes, this is okay. Now, if they do object, if they don't give you a letter of no objection, what do? Well, you're either going to give up or you're going to make it work. So you have to then figure out, will it be approved if you file an alteration type 1 for a new certificate of occupancy? Remember, this is not saying whether or not you can have the use at the space. They're saying whether or not you can have the use at the space under the current certificate of occupancy. This is all about the existing legal use. This is not really about the proposed legal use as much. So the Department of Buildings, you can change the certificate of occupancy. You can file for a new certificate of occupancy, provided that everything you want to do complies with the zoning and building codes. Okay, in which case you're going to have to hire an architect, file the whole application. It's a process, but you can change the use of a building on the certificate of occupancy, you know, if you're within the zoning. All right, so That's the critical point of all this. But if you don't have to change the certificate of occupancy, you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble. All right. So that's why we go through all this effort to figure it out first. And then, as I mentioned, lots of agencies are going to want a copy of this letter, whether it's for buying and selling property or getting certain licenses like liquor licenses or other licenses to operate a business. All right. So thank you for listening. Subscribe. Leave comments below. Let us know if there are any topics you want to discuss. Good luck.